Jerusalem, the news with Martin Lewis.
After challenging the money changers, Jesus, the firebrand rabbi, is himself challenged over his apparent call for a tax strike. Does the rebel rabbi's answer mean compromise with the chief priest and disappointment for the dissidents? Exclusive footage from Galilee reveals that Jesus has revived the secret water rituals of the disgraced Baptist John. We have exclusive footage.
And eyebrows are raised at just how many women there are among the bachelor rabbi's followers.
Good evening and welcome to our special newsroom set up to monitor events in Palestine this troubled Passover period. All through the day, our outside broadcast cameras have been capturing the news as it happens, including a new development in the protest movement led by Jesus, the rebel rabbi from Nazareth. In a statement which has puzzled not only the authorities, but some of his followers as well, the dissident leader now seems to be calling for a tax strike. This from Richard Lindley.
The Jewish people do pay tax, and a lot of it. Tax on their earnings, tax to the temple, and tribute to their imperial masters. So when the rabbi was asked today, should we pay the tribute to Rome, Jerusalem held its breath to see how the rabbi would answer a question designed to put him on the spot. The challenge came in a mid-morning interview with Jesus. Quizzing the Nazareth rabbi on the tax issue was a trick. If Jesus said no to paying tribute, implicitly calling for a tax strike, then he'd be inviting swift and merciless reprisals on the Jewish people by Rome's governor Pilate. In the end, Jesus took some Roman money and asked, whose head is it on this coin? When the interviewer replied, Caesar's, Jesus said, well, if it's his, he should have it, but give God his due. Maybe Jesus was just sitting on the fence, or perhaps this is a new third way in Jewish national politics. Whatever it was, the interviewer had no comeback. This is Richard Lindley at Jerusalem Capitol Studios.
So, how are the rabbi's words being interpreted? With me is Douglas Davis of the Jerusalem Post. Douglas, what did he mean?
Martin, I think he found himself in a trap, but he made a fairly elegant escape. What I think he meant was, matters of this world have their place, but in the great scheme of things, in the final analysis, there's only one law that you should obey, and that's God's law.
But does God say, don't pay tribute?
Well, there are many who believe that the laws of Moses say that it's actually a sin to submit to the authority of any power other than that of God. But having said that, there's another law which says that if you're causing greater suffering by not doing something, that's also wrong.
Pretty intricate reasoning.
Yes, but don't forget, we're talking about a rabbi here, and rabbis spend all their time untying knotty problems. But then again, you must remember, rabbis are also realists.
Douglas Davis, thanks very much indeed. Well, if some people think Jesus pulled his punches in that public debate, others among his supporters claim that their rabbi's teaching is as radical as ever. They say that he's following the same course as his cousin John, the so-called Baptist, who was eventually executed for treason. We have the first pictures from within the heart of the Jesus movement.
The Jordan River close to the Sea of Galilee. It literally gives life to the crops that flourish in what would otherwise be an arid and desolate region. And it's here that the former hermit John started his practice of ritually washing newcomers to his movement. They called him the Baptist. And in spite of John's execution only a few years ago, we can reveal that the Nazareth rabbi has carried on the ritual. We were not ourselves permitted to film it, but we have acquired these pictures, which show present-day followers immersing themselves in the river, so qualifying for entry into God's kingdom. And the link with John is even more direct. Jesus himself was washed in the waters of the River Jordan by his cousin John. John's denunciation of sleaze at the top in the sex life of Galilee's local king, the so-called Salome affair, led to his execution. But that doesn't seem to have dampened the enthusiasm of these converts to the rebel Rabbi Jesus' cause.
Jesus then seems to be following the same path as his radical predecessor John. John himself referred to Jesus as the Lamb of God. coming from a man who was himself put to death as a threat to the state, and at a time when sacrificial lamb is on everyone's Passover menu, some say the very words are a prophecy of doom for this latest dissident baptizer. This is Linda Bryans on the River Jordan.
You're watching Dateline Jerusalem on a day when there's confusion about just how great a threat to the authorities Jesus of Nazareth represents. Coming up later in the program, we've heard about the men behind Jesus, but did a rabbi ever have so many women in tow? And the man with healing in his hands, the patients who say they've had a miracle cure. First, back to the man who's grabbed all the headlines this Passover, Jesus of Nazareth. One of the things that marks him out from other militant agitators is the number of women among his followers. Questions are being asked about the credibility of a self-proclaimed moral leader who surrounds himself with so many members of the opposite sex. Richard Lindley reports from Bethany, the group's Jerusalem headquarters.
No one who's ever met a Jewish mother would ever suggest that women play a secondary role in society here, but when it comes to worship, there are rules. And the rules decree a separation of the sexes. Women and men pray together, but apart. In this most practical of religions, the reason is that neither sex can give undivided attention to God if there's a distraction of the other sex. Yet even in this respect, the maverick rabbi from Nazareth is a modernizer. As Jerusalem's ever-present security cameras reveal, women are prominent among his followers. Eyebrows have been raised at the way women are even allowed to study alongside the men. And that's not the only thing that shocks the traditionalists. In a revelation which has shocked Jerusalem society, reports in the tabloid press say that one of the women supporters closest to Jesus is a former prostitute. Her name is Mary. She's from the town of Magdala, near Capernaum in Galilee. Jesus, who is a bachelor, is said to have cast out devils from Mary, and she's now one of the most respected and stalwart members of the Nazareth sect. It's not an attitude shared by all his followers. One of the Jesus movement's more militant members recently criticized one of the women followers for extravagance when she used a whole bottle of perfume to wash the rabbi's feet. The money, he said, should have been spent on the poor people, whose plight Jesus seems, in public at least, so concerned about. This is Richard Lindley with the Jesus Women.
With me now to discuss the rabbi's unconventional attitude to women is broadcaster Ann Atkins, who has written a book about women in the scriptures. And why have women been given such a prominent role in Jesus' entourage? What's your theory?
It's hard to say. I think one of the things people find so offensive is the way he seems to ride roughshod over social conventions, distinctions between men and women and almost between Jews and Gentiles. So, for instance, he's accepted funding from women. There are even rumours that he's encouraged some women to neglect home and family to study and learn as if they were men, this sort of thing.
But some of the women he associates with appear to be positively disreputable.
And men, yes. The word that comes to mind is sleaze. I mean, some of his friends are pretty unsavoury characters, and I think that's why decent people find it also shocking.
So what clue does the presence of so many women give us about the size, the extent of the threat that Jesus poses?
I think he is a threat. I think if some of these ideas took a hold, they would turn society upside down, and something has got to be done. And rightly, the religious leaders are putting a lot of pressure on the government. Yeah, I think he has to be stopped. Anne,
thanks very much. More now on the rabbi himself. The crowds who follow him aren't drawn simply by his message promising a better future ahead. Many are attracted by the almost inexplicable events associated with the man. There are reports wherever he goes of his so-called miracle cures. In Capernaum, a man was cured of paralysis. In Bethsaida, a blind man recovered his sight. On the Samaria-Galilee border, no fewer than 10 lepers, one a Samaritan, are now said to be healthy. In Jericho, another blind man's sight was restored. And recently, and most controversially of all, a Bethany man, Lazarus, who was pronounced dead, was allegedly brought back to life. It's at the grateful patient's house that the sect has set up its Jerusalem headquarters. Clearly, we have to be skeptical about some of these reports coming as they do from supporters of Jesus. Is this the work of a charlatan? Could there be some sort of mass hysteria at work? Whatever's behind these so-called miracle cures, it's adding to the anxiety of the Jewish establishment. This from David Jessel.
The news was spreading fast among traditionalists about the Galilean preacher's increasingly provocative statements. The religious establishment is taking its own message to the Passover crowds, begging them to ignore the radical rabbi. But it's a losing battle. The man is undoubtedly attracting a following and making an impact far greater than his relatively minor provincial rallies in Galilee. And it's this that's making the Jewish leadership particularly edgy. At any moment, this volatile and resentful people could be triggered into open mutiny. Even for religious traditionalists, the political promise of a new kingdom is irresistible to a country under Roman occupation for nearly 100 years. At the house of the chief priest, Caiaphas, nothing seems to disturb the air of elegant, ordered privilege. But in spite of appearances, the Jewish establishment is terrified and exasperated by the impact of the Jesus movement and baffled by how to neutralize it. One hardline option is to have Jesus arrested on a charge of blasphemy, but that would be unpopular at Passover time, and some legal experts doubt if the charges would stick. Again, no one wants to make a martyr of the man, even though, according to some people, that's exactly what the man himself seems to want. Further options being urged by Jewish establishment hardliners include handing Jesus over to Pilate as soon as he arrives here at Jerusalem Citadel from his palace at Caesarea. There's no doubt that that would lead to summary execution on the grounds of public order. But handing Jesus over would be a tacit admission by Caiaphas that he'd lost control. This is David Jessel outside the Citadel in Jerusalem.
We're getting reports of dramatic new developments in Jerusalem. David Jessel is there. David, what's happening?
Yes, tonight there is sensational news emerging from the Jesus camp. As if yesterday's temple outrage wasn't enough, it's now reported that Jesus has told his supporters that the temple itself will be totally destroyed, razed to the ground. Now, he may, of course, been speaking metaphorically, but this sort of language will be totally unacceptable to the Jerusalem authorities. It's fighting talk, and at the end of the day, when everyone's been debating just how militant this maverick rabbi is, well, now we've got our answer.
Thanks, David. And that news came too late for tomorrow's papers. They're headlining this morning's showdown over paying tribute to Caesar. The Jerusalem Post characterizes Jesus' ambiguous answer with this headline, "Two sides to the coin." While here in Haaretz, we have Back from the Dead, that story about Jesus' alleged miracle cure in Bethany. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Meanwhile, from me and the Dateline Jerusalem team, good night.